Do you get the feeling that your backgrounds just plain and simply suck? Do you want your backgrounds to have that extra bit of dynamic flair? Do you want to learn how to use a collision loop so you can show off to your friends that you know how to use a collision loop? Well, I've got you covered. The dynamically updating, infinitely repeating pattern parallax collision loop, patent pending, is a simple and cost-effective way to make your backgrounds feel alive. So pull up your creating pants, get out a pen and paper, and sit down and shut the hell up, and listen to me as I bring you on a spiritual journey to reach the Geometry Dash equivalent of Nirvana. I am going to show you how to make this effect, where to use this effect, how to put your own spin on this effect, and how to look cool while doing it, which is, as you could imagine, the most important part. Alright, welcome to the Geometry Dash editor, where all of your hopes and dreams will come true, dreams will be made, hopes will be crushed, and you will learn how to use a collision loop so you can brag to your friends about it. Anyways, let's go ahead and open up a new editor level so we can show you how to use this effect. Alright, so the first thing you're going to need is, well, a pattern to put in your background. I'm going to use these simple blocks right here because they're easy to see and easy to distinguish, which is important. So, I'm going to pick 5 of these blocks at random. These 5 blocks right here. This will be my pattern. And it is important to have a pattern that is a nice rounded number of blocks. In this example, I'm using 5. So, right off the bat, you can see we have 5 blocks here. It is a pattern, and it is 5 blocks long. Crazy, I know. So we have our awesome pattern. It is 5 blocks long, it is looking cool, I think I might call him Craig. So our pattern Craig here is going to be copy and pasted in a way that leaves no room on either side, and we're going to just copy and paste a big strip of it. So we're going to have our pattern extend, I don't know, like this far. The way this effect works is by instantly moving the pattern, the length of the pattern, to create a seamless loop. Here's what I mean by that. Our pattern is 5 blocks long. This move button right here with the 3 arrows will move your object by 5 blocks. And if I move it to the right or the left, you can see that it does not appear to be moving. That's not a visual error, that's just the pattern looping on itself. As you can see here, if I move it to the right, it is moving, but since that it is moving the length of the pattern, it is seamlessly looping to where it doesn't look like it's moving at all. So, how the fuck is that working? Well, here's a visual aid. If I copy and paste this strip to where I have 2 strips, and then I move the bottom strip 5 blocks, you can see I'm right back to where the pattern started, and it doesn't appear to loop at all. I can move it by 5 blocks in either direction, and it will appear to not be moving whatsoever. This is the basis that our effect is working on. It is a pattern that is looping to basically be the pattern again. So, how the hell do we set this up to be, well, you know, a thing that loops with triggers and whatnot? Well, we're going to do that by going into the Edit Group option and giving this pattern a group. Group 1 in this example because that's the first free group. We are going to take Group 1, put down a move trigger, target group ID 1, and the first thing we're going to do is lock it to the player X. We can do that by taking this option right here. And we're going to give this a move time of -1, which will make it infinite. If I put a start position down, you can see that all that does is just lock it to the player X, which doesn't look too interesting, I know. But it's going to get interesting, I promise. The next thing we're going to want to do is put down another move trigger, also affecting group 1, and we're going to want to make it move -50. And this is important because -50 is the length of our pattern. -50 translates to 5 blocks, and our pattern is 5 blocks long. So what that's just going to do is give it a little bit of a movement, as you can see. It's moving backwards slightly. And this is one part of our effect. The second part of this effect is putting down another move trigger to move it back the length of the effect. If that sounds complex, all that basically means is instead of moving it backwards, we're going to be moving it forward, but this time with 0 move time. And what that's going to do is basically say, okay, after it moves backwards 5 blocks, just move it forward 5 blocks, and that is the loop that we're going to be looping. And it is those movements that are going to be looped to create our infinitely repeating background. So, how do we loop that? And the answer is, we're going to have to set up a spawn loop. Ooh, scary, I know. But with the addition of 2.2 and some funky new buttons, setting up a spawn loop has never been easier. What you're going to do is open up the pause menu, locate the create loop button, which is directly to the left of this hotkeys button, hit create loop, and your spawn loop is made right for you. Simple as that. Now, this spawn loop on its own is not going to work, and that is because the delay on the spawn trigger is incorrect. Now, to figure out what you have to set your delay to is you have to set it to the move time of the move trigger directly below it. So this move trigger right here has a move time of 0.5 seconds. So we're going to go to this spawn trigger and set the delay to 0.5 seconds. And this move trigger right here has a move time of 0, meaning we're going to set this spawn trigger to a delay of 0. And what that essentially does is it says, okay, after this move trigger right here moves this pattern back by 5 blocks, we're going to move it forward 5 blocks, and that will just repeat infinitely. So if I play it in normal mode now, it appears that the pattern is just infinitely moving behind me, and it appears that the pattern just has an infinite length. Obviously, it doesn't have an infinite length. If I pause and zoom it out, you can see that the pattern is looping. And this is all well and good. You can just call this a finished effect right now. Like, that could be it, I could end the video, and we could all go home. However, this has one drawback, and that is, if the player speeds up or slows down, the effect will stay the same speed according to the player. So I'll show you why that is an issue. I'm going to put down spikes that are not moving at all. If I play this in normal mode now, you can see the rate at which the spikes move and the pattern is different every single time. The spikes are speeding up and slowing down depending on the player, but since we've made this pattern dependent on the player movement by this trigger right here, it speeds up and slows down, which is not what we want. Now, obviously, if the part you're working on only has one constant speed, then you can just get away with doing it this. This is a super simple setup and easy to do, and takes up very little groups. You can do that, and that is easy. However, if the part you're building has multiple speed changes and you want your part to look look good, you can set up a collision loop to loop using distance rather than time. And I'll tell you why looping distance rather than time is important. And using a spawn loop setup like what we've done, we've made time a constant. By making time a constant, we cannot slow up or speed down the effect at all, because if it speeds up and goes faster, then it will move more blocks in that half-second time frame that we've given, and by doing that, the pattern will get all kinds of funky and start getting off the loop, which is not what we want. I will show you an example right here. Let's say, okay, I want the pattern to move faster, and we don't affect the time constant whatsoever. You can see that it isn't working. And if we want to speed it up at all by, let's say, introducing another move trigger right here, what we will find happens is that the pattern will move faster, but as you can see, the loop is too slow to catch up with it, and it just won't work. So how the hell do we get around this? And this is where collision blocks come in. People don't want to learn how to use collision blocks because collision blocks, well, are kind of confusing. So I'm going to do my best to break it down and take you through step by step on how to set up a collision loop. The first thing we're going to need is collision blocks. Shocker, I know. The spacing between these two collision blocks is important, as it will need to be the exact length of your pattern. Since this pattern that I have set up right here is 5 blocks, that is how far the distance between these two collision blocks will have to be. And it is important to give these collision blocks unique block IDs. Block IDs are different from group IDs, that is important to know, and it is important as you will need to know which block IDs are interacting with which. For this example, we're going to have block ID 1 and block ID 2. So the basic principle of how this works is the block ID 2 and the pattern will have the exact same move group, so they will be moving simultaneously. And what this effect will do is it will say every single time collision block 2 comes into contact with collision block 1, it will move forward 5 blocks, therefore infinitely repeating the pattern. So if I move it back 5 blocks, collision block 2 will touch collision block 1, and the whole thing will be moved forward 5 blocks, which, as you can see by looking at the pattern down below, creates that immediate looping effect, which is seamless and causes this effect to work in the first place. So, collision block 2 will need to have group 1, since that is the move group we have given our pattern here. Collision block 2 will also be need to set as the dynamic block. Giving it dynamic block is important because that is what we will use to mark it in the collision trigger, which we will set up now. So this collision trigger is what allows this loop to happen in the first place. So if we select the collision trigger, hit edit object, we can see that it brings up this menu. And to set up this menu, we're going to need to set block A ID to be our dynamic block, which is number 2. If you can't tell which block is your dynamic block, you can just look for which one has the period next to it. As you can see, this has a period on it, and this one does not have a period. The one with the period is our dynamic block. In our collision trigger, block A has to be the dynamic block, and since we've set that to 2, that's what we're going to enter here. And our block B is going to be our non-dynamic collision block, which we have set as 1. So what this collision trigger is saying is every single time block A interacts with block B, we're going to activate a target ID. And our target ID in this example is going to be group 3, which is our next free group. You can find out what your next free group is going to be by opening up the edit group option right here, which is this orange button in the center, and hitting next free. Since I've already inputted group 3 into the collision trigger, it is showing my next group as 4. But if I did not have a next free group set up here, if that was just blank, if I hit the next free, you can see that group 3 is going to be the next free group. Put that into here, make sure activate group is selected, otherwise this will not activate this group when these two collision blocks interact with each other. And that is all you need to do with this collision trigger. This is the setup that you should have when you're done with it. Block A should be collision block 2. Block B should be collision block 1. Make sure collision block 2 is dynamic, otherwise it will not activate the group. It has to do that. So, with this collision trigger setup, we want group 3 to be a move trigger, which will move the pattern the length of the pattern. Since our pattern is going to be moving backwards, we're going to want to set X to 50, which is the length of our pattern, and we're going to want to set that to move time 0. It's important to give this spawn trigger in multi-trigger, as you want this to activate an infinite amount of times, giving this group 3, which is the group that the collision trigger is activated. It's also important to set the target group ID to 1, which is the collision block ID here, and it's also the pattern. That should all have group 1. Now that that is set up, we need to set up our actual movement for the pattern in the first place. So, to set up our movement for this pattern, we're going to do something a little bit different. Unlike the previous loop, we do not want this bound to the player speed in any way, shape, or form. That way the pattern dynamically updates its speed depending on what speed the player is going. So, what we're going to do is we're going to have a move trigger right here. This is moving 1, which is the pattern, and this collision block 2. So for this, we're going to make it move -50, and we're going to give its move time some random number like 1 second. It is important to note that this move time right here will directly affect the speed of it. A shorter time means it will move faster, longer time means it moves slower. So, we have our move trigger set up. This is 1. We don't need to have a second trigger set up over here to move the pattern forward, just because we want this to infinitely loop. So to create a loop, we're going to hit pause, hit the create loop button again, and take our move trigger or spawn trigger right here, and set the delay of this spawn trigger to the same time as the move time right here, that being 1 second. So with all of that set up, we're just about ready to get this started. However, there is one thing we need to do, and that is give collision block 1 right here its own unique group. I've given mine 5 in this example, and we need to lock that to the player X. We can do that by setting up a move trigger, hitting player X, and giving this move time -1. And what this does is it will lock this collision block to the player. And this collision block is not tied to the movement speed of the pattern. And this collision block will speed up and slow down depending on the player, but it's speeding up and slowing down, all that does is increases or decreases the time it takes to reach this collision block. So, I'll show you an example of that. So let's move this down into a place where you can actually see it, and let's place some let's place some speed portals down, like a slow and a fast and like a slow again, just because there's a huge gap between them. If I play this on normal mode and then speed it down using a speed warp hack, you can see that every single time collision block 2 comes into contact with collision block 1, it is moving the pattern forward. And we can see that since collision block 1 is following the exact same speed as the player, the effect speeds up and slows down depending on the player speed. Having the effect being able to speed up or slow down really just adds an extra layer of immersion to your level that I think a lot of levels just don't have. It's unique, and it helps make your level stand out. Now that you have set up your dynamically updating, infinitely repeating pattern parallax collision loop, it is time to show you what applications this has. How do I use this effect? Where can I put it? How do I show off to my friends? Well, before I can teach you that, I think it's best to show you some examples of how I've used this effect in the past. For this castle part in Windstorm, I used the dynamically updating, infinitely repeating pattern parallax collision loop to create 4 layers of cloud parallax you can see on the bottom of the screen here. Something to note that I have done here was take 2 of the layers and put them on T3, above all of the block design, while the other 2 layers are on layers B3 and B4 respectively, that way they're below everything. What this does is really help add a sense of depth to your level. One final thing to note here is that the positioning of the clouds, as well as the clouds themselves, change when you enter into the final part of this level. That is to reflect the clouds in the background of each part, for as the castle part has more blocky structuring with the designs, and the background also has these blocky clouds, so the clouds at the bottom are blocky as well to reflect that. When you enter into the final part of the level, the back layer of clouds rises up just a little bit extra higher to give more depth, as well as the clouds changing to having more rounded features to match the clouds in the background. A way more extreme version of this effect being used is this UFO part in my Insane Demon Cars processing. Pretty much everything here that isn't a structure is looping using this effect. The borders around the screen, the ground, the background, the little window things, the flame things in the background, it is all being looped. This effect is super fun to set up, it's super cool to look at in the editor, and it also saves a shit ton of objects while adding a little bit of lag because, you know, fucking collision blocks and whatnot. But I think the save objects speak for themselves. This level ended up only being 68,000 objects. With that all being said and done, congratulations! You've made it to the end of this creating tutorial. Your skills and prowess in the GD editor have risen by 10%, you now have permission to brag to all your friends that you know how to use a collision loop, and your chances of getting a girlfriend have only gone down. Thank you for watching, I'll see you probably never, goodbye.